everyone. My name is Sheryl Whited, and I have been a master gardener for 11 years, 7 in Arkansas, and then 4 in Texas. My first garden was an in-ground bed in San Antonio, Texas when I was 16, and I've honestly gardened in some form ever since then. So now as we look toward fall, there's a lot that can be done to increase our chances of success in the garden, and that's what I'll be sharing with you in this presentation today. Before we get started, I need to tell you that our presentation is supported by our regional water supplier, Tarrant Regional Water District. TRWD maintains 4 area lakes and pipelines needed to provide surface water to local water treatment plants so they can clean it to meet drinking water standards for our communities. They work with many cities in Tarrant County, such as Fort Worth, Arlington, Mansfield, and many more, to provide water conservation programs to the community. Conservation is an important water supply strategy to help meet the needs of a growing population. There are currently 2.3 million people in Tarrant County, and this is expected to double over the next 50 years. That is why TRWD supports many programs that help save water through outdoor watering and gardening education. At SaveTarrantWater.com, you can sign up for free weekly watering advice custom to your location. If you are a resident of Tarrant County, you can sign up for a free sprinkler system checkup where a licensed irrigator comes to your home and provides a comprehensive evaluation of your system with recommendations to reduce water waste. There is also an event calendar where you can find information about future classes and workshops. TRWD also partners with organizations like Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service and the Tarrant County Master Gardeners to provide educational programs like this one. Be sure to check out SaveTarrantWater.com and sign up for free services. We have a lot to cover, so we'll start by taking stock. It is so critical. This is the time to really dive into your successes and failures in the past growing seasons. What have you learned? What would you do differently or do the same in the future? What are your upcoming goals? It's time to make a list as you head into fall, winter, and early spring. And I'll be honest, I make a lot of lists all the time, and it really helps guide my direction in the garden. This is where it all starts for me. I keep a running journal on the side of our refrigerator as the year goes by, and I take periodic photos in case of accidental erasures. This year's memo board is a much happier one than last year, but it's important to remember past problems because how you tackle those issues can make you a more confident gardener. An example of that is that I changed my entire watering techniques and systems this year based on last year's long-term lack of water. Cleaning up, that's where I start. Cutting back is one of the first things I like to do. Pruning out dead wood, snipping off any side shoots that are coming out of the tomatoes that are still producing. And then I decide if I'm going to pull out roots or leave roots in place to decompose. If the roots are large, say from tomato plants or okra, I may pull them all the way out. But on most plants, I just flush cut them at the ground and leave the roots in place to decompose because that just adds to the organic material in the bed. And as everybody knows, weeding is critical. It's hard to do when it's hot, but before you start off with new seeds and new transplants, if you go ahead and get a real good weeding done, you've got a clean slate to start with. This is also a good time to resurface any pathways in your garden. You can do chop and drop where you take the garden waste out of the beds or the containers and chop it up and strew it across the pathways, or you can add new mulch. I like to use straw. It's economical and it goes a long way, but you can also use a lot of other materials for mulch. After the temps cool a bit, it's a good time to start shearing back annuals and many perennials because you'll often get new blooms. Perennial herbs like sage benefit from a haircut too. And you'll notice in the picture on the left, there's a grow bag that has baby snapdragons in the back and foxfern in the middle with creeping thyme coming out of the front. Creeping thyme definitely needs a haircut, and so do the snapdragons, so that they will bloom again. And the sage on the right, the stalks have gotten kind of tall, and if I go ahead and cut those off and dry them to use in the kitchen, the existing plants will continue to bush out and be very happy. This is actually sage that I started from seed in February of 2022, so it's been very happy. Armenian cucumbers got covered in aphids overnight, and you'll see them in the wheelbarrow. They had to come out, and they went into a covered compost bin to help smother out the aphids. And then on the right, a wheelbarrow full of a lot of different things, including okra plants. When okra tops out and quits blooming and is no longer producing any kind of fruit and leaves aren't at the top, that's when I cut them way down. And sometimes you'll get a second growth of at the base of the plant and get more okra. But I want to get anything out of the garden that's diseased pretty much as quickly as I can. Oh, composting. I can very quickly fill up all these compost bins and bays at the end of summer as I clean out spent plants. And you know, I said on this slide, putting garden and yard waste to work for your benefit. The nutrients you'll get from your homemade compost is worth the effort. You may discover that you have so much material left over that you could build new compost bins after you do a cleanup. I always struggle with that because I have 9 compost bins and bays already. But I've discovered you can never have enough compost. And in this slide, you'll notice that there are plants going in on the left, and I'm already thinking ahead, and this is why I said I debate on building a new compost bin. The photo on the right is a picture of my current cucumber tunnel. It's 8 feet tall, and the plants are planted inside under the shade cloth, and they've come out and grown up and over. So I'm going to have a lot of plant waste material, plus there's okra growing on either side of the tunnel. So with flowers, there's a lot going on in this bed. Fall brings leaves, the joy of leaves. Many of you will probably have access to a lot of leaves this fall. If so, I hope you can take advantage of them. When we lived in Arkansas, we had more leaves than we have here in Fort Worth, but I've still managed to source some places for leaves. In Arkansas, we had 18 enormous trees in our yard, so gathering leaves, making leaf mulch. Leaf mold was never an issue. Leaves can go into compost bins. They can be used to top dress and mulch gardens, and they can also just sit and turn into rich, crumbly leaf mold that'll be full of earthworms by the time you dig into it in 6 months or so. So, you've cleaned up the garden, you've cut back, you've gotten a good head start on getting that clean slate. Now it's time to think about the soil, and honestly, the soil is the most important thing in your garden. And I always advise people to start by getting a soil test, whether you have in-ground beds or raised beds. You can get a soil test done, gather your samples, send it off, get the soil analyzed, and you'll receive a report back. You can contact the extension office about this, and there are private companies that do soil testing. But it's time to amend the soil once you've got those results. More than likely, very few people have the most perfect soil. If needed, every year I'll add more potting soil to my raised gardens prior to adding compost. And I do that because over time, as you are probably aware, soil compacts, and I prefer not to dig up the soil and turn it over. I'd rather add to the top. I use both purchased and homemade compost to top dress all of my beds in the fall. I've found a couple of good sources of organic compost, but it goes quickly, so I do purchase it from the 2 big box stores when they have either organic mushroom compost in stock or just organic compost. To the right, you'll see 2 5-gallon buckets with some of the compost that I just took out of one of my compost bays and sifted. And a little bit goes a long way. I don't usually do more than an inch or so on top of all the beds. And of course, there's a lot of other material that you can add to a garden bed. Soil test results are going to point you in the right direction to go and let you know what minerals and macronutrients and micronutrients you'll need. Some of the other things that you could consider adding would be azomite, just kind of rock dust, expanded shale, bone or blood meal, decomposed manure. There's limestone, and just on and on. After adding compost to all the beds, I'll go ahead and cover them with weed cloth until it's cool enough to plant cover crops or new crops. This has a couple of benefits. It keeps the weed seed that floats around from landing in the bed and taking root. It keeps my garden cats out of the beds, and it also keeps the soil just a little more moist. So you've cleaned up, you've amended, and now you're ready to plan, or perhaps you've been planning all along. I honestly start planning months in advance, but a lot of it's in my head, and now it's time to really get it on paper and make sure I know where I'm going. So the idea is to start with a bare bones sketch. I took a class with a blogger from Wales named Hugh Richards, and this was the whole purpose of the class, and has made such a difference in my gardening journey. This fall will be my 8th season to use this idea of a master plan and as my starting point, and then moving forward. You sketch out everything in the garden. It does not have to be to scale, just so you can read it. And I always recommend doing this in pencil. This is my spring 2023 plan. It shows what was already planted in the beds and what needed to be planted. After I took this photo last February, though, I decided to plant cucumbers where it says peppers on the left, and then we added 2 small steel beds that don't show up on this diagram, just for peppers. So I'll need to add those beds to the plan for the fall, plus another new bed that I'm planning. So you've cleaned up, you've upgraded the soil, you're beginning to plan your fall garden, and it's a great time right now then to consider, what do you and your family like? Are you strictly planting vegetables? Are you going to add flowers? Probably not as many flowers in the fall, other than maybe some more zinnias and cosmos or marigolds, but it's something to think about long term. Are you considering putting in fruit trees or other kinds of fruit? Will you be planting actual trees, shrubs, grasses, bulbs? The list is a long one. Are you going to try something new, such as hugelkultur or a new style of garden bed? Will you branch out and grow crops you've been wanting to try? Lasagna gardening is a practice of layering cardboard and mulch and compost and soil over time, and then letting it decompose enough that you can plant into that substance, and it works beautifully here. As far as trying out new beds, there's so many on the market and so many you can create, from steel and wood beds, concrete block beds, cedar beds. I've seen great raised beds made out of used garage door panels that people have gotten for free. Waist high beds are a great option nowadays because as we all get older, some of us have back problems. And another thing that's not listed on here is grow bag gardening. It's also a great option. We added this 32-inch high steel bed 2 years ago, and I tried to hugelkultur for the first time, we had trees trimmed, had a lot of branches left on purpose. They cut them up for me, and I started by filling the bottom third of the bed with logs and thick limbs. Started then piled on branches and twigs, and started adding cardboard and more garden waste, and even some decomposing garden stakes. And then it was planted the first year with Swiss chard, Malabar spinach, and flowers. After the next season, I went ahead and moved the chard to another bed and added another 12 inches of soil, because the one drawback is that these beds will compact down as the organic material breaks down at the base of the bed. And this year, the bed's been planted with goji berries, comfrey, and more chard. This bed currently is set up and will be ready for a new loquat tree this fall that I'll surround with creeping thyme and rosemary in the spring. And since they're perennial herbs, I won't need to disturb the roots of the loquat more than once as I get the whole thing established. But by putting the tree in early, it'll have the whole winter to start developing its roots. Another thing to do this time of year as you're deciding what you're going to be doing is maybe changing things up. This shows a row bed outside my garden that was a cedar bed packed with flowers and herbs, and the bed started to rot. So I decided to pull out the wood, construct a new steel Vigo bed, and carefully put it around the existing plants. I did have to move some. And this is what it looks like right now. It is jam-packed full. It still has the original Flamacanthus, red autumn sage, black and blue salvia in it, and I've added in coneflowers. And then I added a redbud tree last September. It was 2 feet tall. Now it's over 5 feet tall, so it's doing very well. And planting it in the fall gave it a chance to develop its roots. So now you've done the hard work. You've cleaned, you've amended, you've planned, you may have redesigned. Now you're ready to actually get something in the ground. So benefits of fall planting, especially as we talk about vegetables, edibles. Cole crops will develop strong roots. Cole crops are those that are planted when the weather is cooler. And a lot of people think that cole is a misspelling of cold. It's not. But things like broccoli, cabbages, kale, collards, and on are much happier going into the beds in the fall and overwintering. They will grow. They'll be developing strong roots, and you can put frost cloth over them when the weather's bad. Pull the frost cloth back on sunny days, and you will be rewarded in the spring, I promise. A lot of times when I planted cole crops in September, I may be harvesting as early as January. Another extremely great advantage of planting in the fall is pest pressure is rarely an issue. You won't see harlequin bugs or squash bugs or leaf-footed bugs in the fall and winter like you do here in late spring and all summer long. And as I said, the crops are going to grow and fruit well into the next spring. Many times I'll still have lettuce that is not bitter into early April that I planted back in September. So that's a lovely benefit. Last fall, I planted Mexico midget tomatoes for the first time and in September, and they grew rapidly and were delicious. They were very small, almost a currant tomato, Currant. I also planted broccoli, and it did not do as well, and I think that was my fault, not broccoli's fault. But you'll notice I did plant it in yogurt containers. I saved those and used them to prevent pill bugs from devouring seedlings and transplants. And they work really well. They also serve as a wind barrier. My backyard gets a lot of wind coming through it. So these are helpful with many of the things that I plant early. Kale was planted on the left and collards on the right in beds that are full of that were full of blue spice basil, which is a great pollinator plant, and it was also a great trap crop for harlequin bugs in 2022. And the kale and collard were again planted in yogurt containers, collars. I should say that I cut the bottoms out of the yogurt containers, and these made tremendous crops well into late March. I did pull them out in March, or I flush cut them, excuse me, in late March because some bugs were starting to show up. I'm a firm believer in the benefits of cover crops. If you have empty beds at the end of summer, after you've added your soil and compost, and you're not planning to perhaps grow edible crops in them for the fall, it's so easy to broadcast cover crop seed. I have planted everything from red clover that you see blooming on the left. That's actually a photo taken in April of clover that was planted the previous October. To the right, you'll see packages of seeds of oats and peas, buckwheat, mustard. I know I have the hairy vetch seeds to plant too, and all of these do well here. I especially like planting buckwheat and oats and peas. Oats and peas are great because the peas themselves are legumes, and they pull nitrogen, and it's stored in their roots, and it will benefit whatever's planted next in that bed. And the best way to do it is to toss the seeds out, cover them with just a little bit of soil, water them in well, and then just let them grow. You can cover them if we have a frost. I don't, and haven't. The only thing you'll lose in a frost would be the oats. But even then, in the spring, when it's time to plant in those beds, if you flush cut everything down, all those decomposing roots are really going to benefit your new crop of plants. And you probably gathered by now that I believe we should always plant trees in the fall. It is the best time to plant and transplant trees in North Texas. I have planted figs in the fall, oaks in the fall, redbuds in the fall. All have done really well here for me. I've been very, very pleased. Perennials love fall planting. Crossvine is a tremendous performer here for us. It's an evergreen vine. It is a vigorous grower, and it's heavy, so you definitely need to plant it on a fence or a trellis, and it will spread and spread. But it's worth it to me for the week to 3 weeks that you get blooms. And because it blooms so early, this picture was actually taken in February a couple of years ago, late February. The bumblebees love it. It's one of the first things you see them diving into. There's also a photo of one of my pollinator beds when it was just 4 months old. It was planted in October, and this is a February photo of yarrow and coneflowers, some columbine, and bee balm. Bulbs. There's so many bulbs that do well if planted in the fall. This is grape hyacinth. And so many other bulbs, daffodils, iris, just do beautifully. Crocuses, tulips, when they're planted in the fall. I do have two pollinator beds that need a lot of attention this time of year. Perennials need to be trimmed back, and many usually need dividing. But before cutting back, I make sure I can see some new growth coming out from the base of the plant. On the left of the photo, you'll see garden phlox, and it's finishing up its really long bloom time. It's looking pretty tattered, but it's still being visited by a lot of butterflies, including the giant swallowtail in the photo. However, there is a lot of new growth down at the base, and as soon as the blooms are totally through, I will cut the stalks down and let it just get a head start on the spring. The next photo is Henry Dulberg salvia, which is a wonderful performer for us here in North Texas. This is all new growth at the base of these stalks, and it is just about through blooming too, so it's going to be cut back down in a couple of weeks. And then there's Black-Eyed Susan or Rudbeckia. There are many different varieties of this. This is just a great performer, and again, you have choices with this one. You can leave the seed heads on it all winter, or you can go ahead and cut it back when it's through blooming. I tend to cut it back just because it's a little neater looking, but you don't have to. I'd rather get this kind of work done in the fall than try to have to get it all done in the spring. And the last one is Greg's Mistflower, which pollinators adore, and it will get a haircut soon too. Some of our bulbs need to be overwintered inside, such as elephant ears. So that I always wait till the day before our first predicted frost. But I do watch the weather really closely this in late fall. And the day before the first frost, I want to cut the leaves off, dig up the bulbs, shake off a lot of the soil, but I don't wash them or anything. I lay them in a box with newspaper. And they overwinter in my garage. So they're going into the garage usually in November. And I don't plant them until May. And this was a photo of elephant ears from 2022, and they have made stellar plants this year. They're still obviously growing, but the same treatment will happen. And at this point, these bulbs were 2 years old. So they're a very reliable performer here for us. Another thing that we're doing this time of year in our garden is growing on, continuing with plants that we planted in the spring, early summer, such as Swiss chard, okra, tomatoes, bell peppers. I still have 2 tomato plants from the 10 that I started with in the spring. They were all great performers, but towards mid-July, Florida leaf-footed bugs and other members of the stink bug family really started putting a lot of pressure on my plants, my tomato plants. And so I just have 2 left, like I said, but they are fruiting again and doing well. And so I'm going to keep growing them until they're ready to, they just quit producing. Peppers will bounce back so strongly this time of year. You're going to be amazed if you have peppers that you've kept growing all summer long. Well worth the effort. Of course, sweet potatoes are planted in late April, early May, and they won't be harvested now until some point in October usually. And another very satisfying plant to grow, but you're going to keep watering them now so that you have a bumper crop. So even though we're talking about fall, it's always good to be thinking ahead to your late winter, early spring planting, seed starting process. Once you get this fall garden started or get things put to bed just so they can rest, it's a good time to start looking through your seed packets. Check out your favorite vendors, browse seed catalogs, make a list of plants you'll always grow, make a list of plants that you'll probably never grow again for a lot of different reasons. I know that I'll always grow herbs, asparagus, tomatoes, cucumbers, peas, okra, carrots, onions, Irish potatoes, sweet potatoes, figs, and flowering annuals, and native perennials, and native trees and shrubs. I'll always grow a lot of stuff. I won't grow Malabar spinach again. We just didn't like the taste of it. And I haven't had good luck with green beans, but I keep trying different varieties every year. So it is my goal to become a good grower of green beans. But whatever you decide to do in the garden this fall, just remember it's always great to dream big. But if you and your family will not eat kale, don't plant an entire bed of kale. Do try something new if you are willing. Last fall, I planted all of my carrots in grow bags instead of having some growing in garden beds, and it worked beautifully. These are some of the best carrots I've ever grown. And the neat thing about doing that was I carried a grow bag over to my grandson's house, and he thought it was a blast pulling carrots out of the bag, and he's already asked me to do that again. I also decided I wanted to grow some type of cucumber that would do especially well here in our weather. And Baker Creek was advertising a cucumber that didn't need much pollination, if any pollination. It's called China Jade, and I'm so glad I grew them this year because they have been not only easy but delicious. They're not a pickling cucumber, they're a slicing cucumber. But I'll grow them again from now on. I've listed some resources. A&M's websites, Earthkind Landscaping, great source. Garden Gate magazine, if you're not familiar with it, is a really good one. It comes out every 2 months. One of my favorite websites is eartheasy.com. They sell a lot of stuff, but they have a blog and an index of lots of articles that they published. Really good advice. Of course, I've gotten a lot of advice from master gardeners in the last 11 years. I've been gardening for 49 years. I have found many garden vloggers on YouTube. But my 3 favorite channels are Hugh Richards, he gardens in Wales, Epic Gardening, he gardens in San Diego, and Growing in the Garden, she gardens in Mesa, Arizona. And while they're not, any of them, our exact growing zone, Hugh Richards comes closer, but the climate is so different in Wales. I have learned a lot from them. And I would advise you, no matter what you do, always have fun. You'll notice the pictures of the pumpkin that have been scooped out and filled with soil and some of the seeds that came out of that particular pumpkin. And they sprouted, and that's just a fun kind of thing to do. And no, there wasn't time for it obviously to grow into more pumpkins, but it just made a fun piece of autumn decor. If you have any questions, you can definitely email me. And you'll see my email address on the screen. I want to thank you for listening today and wish you a lot of luck in your fall garden. Take care.